when I was a teenager, my dad passed away very suddenly. When my dad died, my mom was tasked taking care of me, my two younger sisters, managing full-time work, taking care of the household all by herself. And that really struck with me into adulthood.
Women now freezing their eggs because they want to have a career, but they also know that they don't necessarily have the support, so they're delaying having children to pursue careers.
What type of woman do you think, or mom do you think, needs a service like this? And she broke down and started crying and saying, "Mums like me, you're not alone. It's not shameful to ask for help. Often it's a smart thing to do, and it's really how do we actually just open up the accessibility for more people to be able to get that help."
Welcome to another episode of the Sisterhood Club podcast. And today, my guest is somebody that is incredibly inspiring. And I know that her journey and her story is really going to inspire you today as well. Sarah, amazing to have you with me today. Can you start by telling the audience a little bit about yourself, your business, and who you are and what brought you here today? Over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So I run two businesses, but one is my ultimate baby, and it's a company called MTime. And we give busy parents their time back by matching them with family assistants that we call Moncierges. And they're trained to do a mixture of housekeeping and nannying tasks. And as part of our social impact, we actually work with different charities, community groups, and government organizations to help women who are new or returning to the workforce, so typically long-term unemployed, get back into jobs by training them to become assistants to work with us. Yeah.
Incredible. And what about the other business?
Yeah, so I also just joined a consultancy, which is really focused on just helping more businesses with strategic execution. The whole vision is really that success in business is 10% idea, 90% execution. So we're really here to help people with that 90%. And it really draws upon all the learnings that I've had with running MTime and how can I actually give back. And I guess start supporting other businesses to build whatever they want as well.
Incredible. Absolutely amazing. Now, when I read about the concept of MTime, I thought, wow, now that is solving a real problem. And Pam, my co-host, business partner, who unfortunately can't be here today, she would look at your business and go, good God, I need that. She's an incredible woman, inspires me every single day. But the reality is she's got two young children, a 9-month-old and a 6-year-old, and she's running a business. And there are days where she would admit that she struggles. She's from the UK herself, so she hasn't got any family to support, to pick up the kids. It is literally her and her husband doing everything. And I think that what you've created with MTime is such a incredible and a needed service. So can you talk a little bit about how the idea came around, the success of that business, how you've gone about scaling that, growing that, how you've sourced these women to become, nannies and things? Like, how have you gone about that process? I'd love to dive deeper into that.
Yeah, so I guess the genesis of the business really came from personal experience. So I'm not a parent yet, but when I was a teenager, my dad passed away very suddenly, and I grew up in Wagga in New South Wales, but my family is from Nigeria, so we were really isolated from everyone. So when my dad died, my mom was tasked taking care of me, my two younger sisters, managing full-time work, taking care of the household all by herself, and that really struck with me into adulthood. So that because I just couldn't kind of get over the idea that there was no one there to help her. Except for as a child, you're trying to do what you can, but it was just so clear that she needed someone who could have come in and just helped her with whatever it was she needed on the day, because what she needed on the day as a parent, it's always going to vary. Like some days you do need someone to help you cook. Some days you need someone to take the kids to school. It's so varied. And then that way she would have had more time to focus on her grief and had more time to be there for me and my sisters. And so it was really just that realization of in those high stress situations, we really need someone to be there for us, that kind of brought about the idea. So then it was when actually testing it further, we initially just went on Instagram, and this was back in 2016. So this is when you could get good reach on Instagram without paying for it. And influencers weren't as much of a thing as well. So we were able to message all these mummy bloggers and just said, hey, we have this idea. We're a couple of beauty students. We have an idea for a service to help new mums specifically, because we thought people in high stress situations, like the one my mum was in, was the key market. And then also new mums, because that is a high stress situation because you're transitioning into a new role. So we said we organize getting a nanny, a cleaner, and then a box of food that would make a meal sent to your home. And so they were really happy to share it for us for free. And we were able to like time things with Instagram. So we grew a profile relatively easy compared to how easy it is today. And then we got inundated with women. Like we just had a PayPal link, and we had inundated with women paying us, saying, yes, I need this. People emailing, pitching after we said, we've already got 10 people, we can't do anymore. And we didn't have a business or anything yet. But that was really the moment that we're like, wow, this is such a big need. This is so important that people are literally pitching us to be chosen for us to give this service to them. And so once we had the 10 women that we gave that initial, what was basically a gift package to, in exchange, we asked them, can we interview all of them? So then we went all over Melbourne after everyone had the nanny, the cleaner, and the meal kit sent to them, and asked them how it was. And then there were three main things that people said that I really struck with me. One was that everyone said having the two people come into their home was actually like more work, because it was more of a mental load to work out, when is the cleaner coming? How do I let them in? I did interested to the kids, all these different things. So that became another job in itself. They said that they needed it to be described as me time, to not feel guilty from telling their friends about it, because that was the only time when they were describing that they had all this, because it felt too luxurious to get the help. But if they framed it as me time to their friends, everyone was like, oh yes, that's fine. So that's where MTime comes from, once we had that insight. And the third was that they needed this all the time, not just once off as a gift. They're like, I need this to come into my house every day. I have my kids not just once off. I've got them until they're until they're at least 18. So that's when we realized, okay, this needs to be one person who can come in, and they need to come in actually on a weekly basis. Otherwise, they're not actually going to be reducing the level of stress that comes in. So there we had it, that it was the chronic users, who is the typical working parent. And then we have people in those acute moments of stress who might have had a loved one die, or they've just had a new baby, or maybe they've just moved and they're trying to settle in. But that was basically just from that initial test on Instagram is how we ended up actually building out the idea. And I always tell people that like that process of actually really testing it, those insights still shape the business till today. But if we hadn't gone through with that testing process, we just would have been stuck. We would have been so limited in how much impact we would have been able to have.
I think that's, well, first and foremost, thank you for sharing that with me about your dad passing away. And I'm really sorry to hear that. And I think your story, Sarah, is really inspiring, because you have used that and created something from that pain. And I've always find that so striking in individuals, because there's always two paths that people can go down, victim or creator. And you've really gone down the path of creator and used that experience in your life to do something that's helped so many women like your mum. And I think that is just such an inspiring story. And I feel really moved by what you've done. And you mentioned as well the word guilt, because I think this is just so rife in our society, the pressure on women these days. And I was actually reading an article in the AFR over the weekend about women now freezing their eggs because they want to have a career, but they also know that they don't necessarily have the support, so they're delaying having children to pursue careers. But then the government's saying, no, we need women to have more children. We need to have more children. But then hang on a second, where's the support? Because childcare is so frigging expensive. So if you're saying to a woman, we need you to have more children, but it's like, well, hang on a second, then I can't go to work. How am I supposed to support my family? Because it's then the choice out of putting my kid into daycare, which is going to cost me, God, $1,000 a week sometimes.
Yes.
Probably about that, I think, actually, if you don't get the rebate. versus going and having a career or staying home. And it's, I don't have the solution, but I think it's businesses like yours that the government, I hope, could be funding and could be putting some more resources behind, because women, we can't do it all, and we need help. And I think from the women that I've sort of been speaking with, a lot of women find it hard to ask for help, because again, it's sort of seen as weakness, because we're supposed to be, seen as strong, having it all together, when inside we might be completely falling apart. Have you experienced anything like that over your journey of building MTime? And what do you say to those women that are really struggling to have a career, keep a family happy, keep themselves healthy? Like, it's so much pressure it feels on women. And what sort of, I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, it was actually in that group of 10 women that we first gave the service to, that this came up the most prevalently, like the strongest for me. I still remember it so vividly, because we went to this woman's house, and I remember she was actually like quite irritable in our interactions with her previously. So I was a bit nervous in it going, I was like, oh, I hope she's all right. Like, we'll see how we go. And then we asked her, we were interviewing her, same set of questions that we have, and I can't remember the other ones, but I do remember the main one, which was, what type of woman do you think, or mom do you think needs a service like this? And she broke down and started crying and saying, "Mums like me." And at that point, it clicked in. I'm like, this woman was never rude or anything. She was carrying so much. And myself and my business partner was sitting there consoling her. We're like, every woman that we've just like I can promise you, we've just spent the last week meeting women all over Melbourne of completely different demographics, and they've all had the same story of like, it's so hard to do it by yourself. And she's like, really? Are you sure? My family lives overseas. It's only my husband's parents that are here. I feel so isolated. I don't know if everything I'm doing is right. And we were sitting there consoling her. And it was at that point, like that was the particular conversation where I was like, oh, we really have to do this. And we really have to work out how we do what we can to remove that stigma. And how do we share people's stories so that people know that like, you're not alone. It's not shameful to ask for help. Often it's a smart thing to do. And it's really, how do we actually just open up the accessibility for more people to be able to get that help? And just, the look in her eyes of just disbelief, like, really? There are other women like me? Like, yes, like we've spoken to so many. And that was when we're like, yeah, we're going to call it MTime, and it's me time for busy parents to kind of do what we could to remove the stigma. And one of the things that we've always been trying to work on is how can we increase accessibility? Because one of the challenges for us as a business is that, we hire everyone as employees, we do training. So we've got to make sure that we can maintain the standards for our staff. And that's really, really important to me. But at the same time, it means the affordability is hard. So we've been trying to look at different ways of working with business, other opportunities to work with government. And there was one business we spoke to. I really loved speaking to her, because she's like, how could we create this a movement? So that was something that we're looking at. How could we create a movement around this so that the government will take notice? And it's something that's always in the back of my mind. And what are those things that we can do so that, just as you said, open up that accessibility so more people can be supported?
100%. And I think it's just almost it's these types of conversations that women listen to, and just hearing you're not alone, and everything you're going through, other women are going through. And I think this is my whole theory of sisterhood. Let's support each other. Let's collaborate. Let's share. Let's be vulnerable in front of each other, because then that opens up this dialogue of women just being like, God, I'm so glad you just said that, because I feel that way as well. And I'm totally overwhelmed and I don't know what I'm doing and I'm winging it. And everyone can just sort of have these conversations, and instantly a problem shared is a problem halved, right? And we can support each other rather than judge each other. And that's just got to stop, in my personal opinion. So I just want to take a moment, Sarah, to just say what you're doing with that business is so important, and keep going, because even just having the conversation, having the businesses bringing awareness to a very, very important issue in our society. And I really want to see women being supported and set up for success.
Yes.
And not having to choose, God, do I have a kid or do I have a career? Because it shouldn't be a choice, but at the moment it is, because having a child is expensive.
Yeah.
um
Right.
and time consuming and a lot of work, and most women don't have the luxury of saying, oh yeah, I can just take a year off. Like, actually they can't,
Right.
because the cost of living is now so expensive. So yeah, it's a real issue, and got quite a lot to say on it, but we'll maybe won't go down that rabbit hole. But look, you've also said something that I completely agree with. This whole thing of like, success is in 90% of the execution and 10% in the idea. And that story that you just went through with MTime of DMing all those mompreneurs and those mum bloggers and going to meet with them and taking action, and that is such an important part of entrepreneurship. It's all in the action you take, in the execution. How do you, like, I think what I notice in a lot of people is they have an idea and they are really motivated and they want to start it, but they've got all this doubt and they've got all these beliefs and they've got this fear of failure and what will people think and what if it fails. How have you overcome that in your time, and what in your experience do you come up against when working with entrepreneurs and business owners?
Yeah, I mean, my very, very honest answer is that I was 22 and naive when I started my company.
That helps.
Yes, yes. So that was extremely helpful. And sometimes, to be honest, and so now I find myself kind of thinking back to like, what would my younger self have done to just put myself out
Mm.
there? But even then, I remember we were talking so much about the idea and how good it was until we were at an office hours that some of the different accelerator programs run. And I remember one of the managers just said, why don't you guys just start? You've been talking about it for a while, but you haven't done anything. And that like really like stopped her. And we were like, hey, she's right. Like, we have researched, we've talked about it, we've like looked at making a website, all of that. And then that really just kind of flicked a switch in our heads of like, it's amazing when it's in your head because there's no problems yet. But until you actually like, put rubber to the road, it doesn't mean anything. And then that was when we're like, all right, we'll just start. And then that was the hardest part, because as soon as we had it up on Instagram, then people were replying. And then the next actions just become so clear. And so whenever I'm working with people that do have an idea, or even if they've already been working on something for a while and you're kind of like, well, what's the next step to do? It's like the worst thing you can do is just sit in the indecision. As soon as you take at least one action, your next actions will start to have that ripple effect. And that's something I remind myself of like constantly whenever, now that naivety is gone, if I'm like, I want to start a new business slide, or I'm trying to think of what's the best way to support someone else in their business. It's like, well, you've got to just have that first idea, execute on it, and then let it kind of keep rolling down from there.
I think that's it's so important, isn't it? And sometimes you've just got to begin. You've just got to start. You just got to do something, and that's how you learn. And I think the quickest way you learn when it comes to business or anything is by making a few mistakes.
Yeah,
People
exactly.
are so scared to make mistakes. They're so scared to like, oh God, but you just got to dust yourself off and go again. And I think, yeah, you were young. You didn't have maybe the mortgage to family and all the things that people got. I've got responsibilities now. I can't go for it. But I always go back to this whole thing of like, what would I do if I didn't do it, if I didn't start it, and that idea of regret of not doing something. So when you're like, I guess advice for people out there that maybe are thinking of transitioning careers or starting a business, like when you're sort of weighing up things of whether to do something or not, do you have a process that you go through, or do you advise people to say, these are the things that you need to think about, these are the steps that I would personally take? Do you have anything that you sort of offer people to help them take the leap of faith and go for it?
Yeah, well, there are a few, like, I guess, thinking frameworks. Like, one of them is the one that you just mentioned of like, would I regret not doing this? Like, if I would look back, would I have a lot of regret about it? And that's like, that one, like, personally, like, has saved me a few times of like, yeah, I would actually be more upset. I'd be more upset to have not tried than the idea of it just not working out. But then one of the ones that I find I tell people the most, and it seems to resonate the most, is actually just, it seems to be a lot of fear of what other people will say to you that's really stopping people from making the step. And then when you kind of stop and think about it, like, no one who's doing more than you is ever going to be criticizing what you're doing. It's always people who are too afraid to do it, or are too nervous, or are too caught up in what societal expectations may be, that will be commenting about it. It's in that same way of like, don't take advice from somebody who's not living the life that you want. And but that view of like, well, if these people aren't even doing it and they're commenting, but no one above me is going to be, that no one who started a business is going to be like, why would you do that? Like they would be giving you advice about it. And that kind of helps put the noise into perspective and it helps kind of quiet some of those doubtful voices as well. And then I always say as well that once you do that, and then you're like, well, who are the people who have done more than I have, or they've done what I've wanted to do? The advice that you get from them is actually going to propel you a lot more forward. And that's what's going to actually give you the steps, because then you can hear from their journeys. And whenever I talk to people about that, they always stop and they're kind of like, oh, well, no one I've spoken to has actually started a business before, or they've tried to expand overseas, or they've quit their job. And it's like, why am I asking them? Why would they know? And it's no fault of theirs. The advice is always, well, usually coming from a good place, but like it doesn't actually make sense. But that's just what we naturally do, is go to our peers.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Actually, I hadn't thought about that before, because you're asking people who are kind of doing what you're doing. They've got a secure job, and so they might be like, "Oh God, you're mad! Like, you're in a really well-paid job, and you've got a steady income, and you've got a family." Like, they're going to project all of their fears onto you,
Exactly.
and you're going to end up just like having this sort of conversation, end up talking yourself out of it even more. So, I always think like it's really important to find people who inspire you, people who are, like you said, doing what you want to do. Define what success looks like to you, and go and find people who are living your version of success.
Yes, exactly.
And read about them, learn from them, reach out to them if you can and say, hey, look, what's the biggest piece of advice? A lot of people want to help other people. I really do think that is something that, from a lot of people I speak to on the podcast now, and a lot of people I've met, they want to help people. They want to, they're sort of living life on their terms. They're going after their dreams. And I think once you start that journey, you go, God, I want more people to do this, and I want more people to be living life for them and not others. Because one of the best books I've ever read that really helped me take the leap of faith was The 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bonnie Ware.
But that sounds
Right,
like something I should read.
Sarah, you've got to read it. It's not an easy read. It's not a lie on the beach, open it up and, sip a pina colada read. It's quite deep. But the first regret, the number one regret of people who are on their deathbed was, I wish I lived a life that was true to me and not what others expected of me.
Wow.
And when I read that, I still get goosebumps now, because how many people put their dreams, their career goals, what they want to achieve in their life behind everybody else's. And when I read that, I actually had to put the book down and just took a deep breath and thought, what am I waiting for? I don't want to be on my deathbed, whenever that is, and have that regret. I want to look back and go, God, I lived a good life. And even if I stuffed up, failed, whatever, I can still say, but I did it. I took that risk. I had that experience. I've got memories that were made from that. I pushed myself outside of my comfort zone. I lived up to my true potential. That's how I want to feel when I'm on my deathbed at 100 something, and this crazy old woman that's got lots to say, still podcasting probably, but no, I think that was a really key moment for me, and I think you've touched upon that beautifully as well. But what I'm also really curious about as well, Sarah, and I'm fascinated by this, like, entrepreneurship has become quite trendy, and I am always interested, like, do you think everyone has the potential to have a successful business? Or are there certain traits that people have? Can they be taught? Can they be learned? What's your personal opinion on what makes a successful entrepreneur? Like, why do some people succeed and others don't? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question, actually. I haven't thought about that before. But I think, like, I gutturally think anyone has the potential to be an entrepreneur. But I think the thing that separates people kind of ties back to what we were talking about before, is just that willingness to start, that willingness to try, and the willingness to be uncomfortable 24/7. And I think that discomfort and then the level of responsibility that's attached with
Mhm.
it, like being incredibly responsible and being incredibly uncomfortable, it's not a usual combination, but that's like
Mm.
what you experience all your time as an entrepreneur. So I think like the thing that I guess comes to mind when I think of people who I meet that I'm like, I don't think you quite have it to
Mm.
be able to almost put up with that level of discomfort and unknown. It's more like I'm hesitant to say it's like a mindset thing, but it really is. Like I feel like it's almost cliche to say it really is just a growth. Like if you're capable of getting a
Mhm.
correct mindset, then sure you can be an entrepreneur. Um, but I think why I hesitate with it is because I also know people that I think they would be able to do it, but they have enough self awareness to say I'd rather be an employee. So that's where I'm a little bit like
Yeah.
there's so many different pieces to it in terms of mindset, in terms of knowing yourself, in terms of maybe someone's really comfortable with the discomfort, but they're not comfortable with the responsibility. Like there's such a
Mm.
unique array of things that you need to have. And I think sometimes
Mhm.
you can't really know whether you have it or not until you have that willingness to start. So maybe my
Mhm.
long-winded answer is I think anyone has the potential, but the real qualifier of who will be able to make it or not is just someone who starts. Because if I meet someone who at
Mm.
least started and they failed, that already speaks volumes to like just their belief in themselves and their openness to experience, which is so critical.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And I think also it's also being okay with knowing that if you are happy in your job, in your career, working 9 till 5, there is no shame in that. And I think that some days,
100%.
honestly, Sarah, I sit there and I go, God, I give anything to be on a salary right now and earn some super.
Yeah. Oh
Like
my God.
we've we've all had
It's
those
so
days where I
true.
just go, oh, salary sounds nice today.
Well, I'd love to take a sick day. I'd love for it. I'd love to take a
Yeah.
sick day in the or we used to joke. When all my friends when we were all in the cellar, they're like, "Oh, imagine when we can take like annual leave. Imagine we could sick
Oh,
day, don't
what's
have to work."
that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I've had lots of conversation with friends who are like, "I want to start a business," and some of them I've like told them really point blank. I'm like, "You will not be able to handle it. Not because I don't think
Mm-hmm.
you have the aptitude, you
Mm-hmm.
just won't be able to without having a super or knowing where your paycheck comes from. You're like you've got to a certain level just from me knowing you that you're so comfortable with those things, and
Mm-hmm.
the time frame that you think that it will take for you to regain it to the level that you have now is unrealistic."
That's really important as well, isn't it? Because it is that blend of ambition and taking action and also patience, because
Yes,
there's
yes,
no such thing as an overnight success. And my recruitment company that I have, CH Talent Solutions, started that 5 years ago. And that has been, an up and down journey. Like we've had COVID, we're basically in a recession right now.
yeah.
Like there's never and there's never been in my whole 5 years a really easy week in business. Like either someone
I would
stuffed up
agree.
on a client, or we've lost an employee, or like somebody's doing something somewhere. There's never a week that goes by that I can just go, oh, that was a great week, nothing happened that this week, no dramas. Like there's always stuff going on, and
True.
I love it. I actually thrive off it because I need to feel in my life that I'm growing. And I think one thing that I do love about business and entrepreneurship and things is that there's always a problem to solve. There's always
Yeah,
something that I'm focusing on. Okay, what's going on? What's the solution? And I really enjoy that. That's the part of business that actually I do really enjoy. Of course, I enjoy the success and everything else when things are going well, but I think that in my mind is probably maybe the difference between somebody that goes on to make it and those that maybe don't, is that I guess I have this ability to not give up, to keep
yeah.
going when stuff really starts falling apart and
Yes, Sarah,
going,
tell you.
okay, resilience, grit,
Yeah.
resilience. It is so important. And I'm curious, do you think that can be built, or like, do you think that you like some people go through hardship, like obviously you went through hardship in your childhood. I moved away from home when I was very young and fended for myself. Do you think that you need to go through something like that that's kind of like gives you that experience early on in life to just toughen you up a bit? Or do you think that we can build resilience over time from things going wrong and how we handle it?
I think resilience can be built, but I do think I think it's very challenging. And I
Mm.
think in some ways that's why just the process of starting is kind of like my tell usually for people. Because if you even just the process of starting a business, like when let's say I want to make a website, something will go wrong in the in the building of your website. Like something as simple as that could do half an hour on Squarespace. And like even just how people react to something as simple as that, or like being able to say, okay, I've got my website up. How am I going to go about the process of getting customers? If you quit at that point when you haven't actually started, or there's problems that are coming
Mm.
up already and it hasn't already started, then that's probably the sign that you need to work on your resilience a little bit. And I think it's
Mhm.
more like how do you build your problem solving skills in that way? Because I think that ties so closely into resilience. Because I think for those of us that can keep going, we always see that there's another path, or there'll be something else that I can do. There's something else that I can try. But it's that moment that
Mm.
like your resilience ends the moment you're like, I can't think of another way, or I don't want to go for another way. And so
Mhm.
I think it's hard to build. I think this is a very controversial thing to say, but I think when you have had those things happen to you when you're younger,
Mm.
or in your young adulthood as well, it does help you to be able to deal with
Mhm.
them just because you have perhaps you're more
Mhm.
exposed to it. But
Mhm.
I still think it can be built because there's some people I know who haven't had those difficult experiences. They've certainly had them now from growing a business,
Mhm.
and they were still able to keep moving. Although I will say,
Mm.
meeting them after having the business difficulties, they're far better entrepreneurs. And I think they would say that
Yeah.
themselves as well, just because now that they've had that tough moment, and then it just builds your confidence knowing that I can get through the next thing.
Correct. It kind of stacks, doesn't it? That evidence of I got through that. Cool. Tick. Right. I've solved that. Another stack, another stack, another stack. And I think people have it backwards when it comes to confidence. That word you just said there. They think I've got to have the confidence to start. And I say no, the confidence comes from the courage to start.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
once you have that evidence of "Oh, that was a really tough situation, but I overcame it. Right. Now I've got to deal with this. I'm working through it. You start to back yourself and you start to realize, I have got this. I
Mhm.
can do this. And that's where confidence comes from, not the other way around. And that's always something I'm talking about, especially when it with women, because unfortunately, and I'm not sure if you found this as well, Sarah, but I've worked with a lot of women over the years, and they do lack that self-belief a lot of the
Mhm.
time. And because I think our society doesn't really set women up for success,
Well, if
really.
we're
Like when I when
confident,
I
we're arrogant. Like we don't get to
a
we don't get to put ourselves out
100%.
there in the same way that men do.
100%. And, you know, it's if you've got an opinion, oh, you're a bit of a drama queen, you're a bit feisty. Hang on a minute.
Yeah.
You just listened to Big Derek over there, voice off, and now I've got something to say and I'm opinionated. Like, we've got to be very aware in our society of how we do treat the opposite sexes. And yeah, I've, again, that I could go off on a tangent on that, but you know, I really just want to install in women just to back yourself, believe in yourself, and understand that confidence is a skill and it comes from courage. It's the
Yeah.
willingness to try, it's the willingness to show up, and that's how you get the evidence and that's how the confidence builds. But I love to touch upon now, Sarah, like you're obviously a busy woman. You're doing a lot in your days at the minute. How do you structure your time, your days? Because I think one thing that I always get asked from people who are sort of starting to work for themselves, like how do you stay motivated, Georgie? How do you stay so disciplined to get the things that get the work done? Because when you're working for somebody, that person saying, right, I need this by this time, you don't have that when you're running your own business. So how do you stay focused, energized, and productive to get the best outcomes for your business?
Yeah, so I'm a big lover of structure, because I like
Mm-hmm.
anything that means I don't have to think about it. That it's all kind
Mm-hmm.
of like automatic, so that it just kind of frees up my head. So I guess I usually structure my week broadly, and I structure each day. So on Sundays is when, although I've gotten better at not doing any work at all, but I will always plan out my week and write my to-do list and I'll plan what I plan to do each day, so that then when I wake up every morning, I don't have to think about it. But then
Mm-hmm.
on each day, so like on Monday evening, I've scratched off everything that I've done on my to-do list, or maybe I've had to move some things around if things have come up. But then it's all right, the to-do list for the next day, and cross-reference it from like, these are the overall things that you have to do this week. And that's been my process probably since I started MTime. And that's actually served me really well because I've just always been really clear that I have like another area of like backlog. If I'm like, this can't be done this week. And it almost makes me feel better for like my anxiety of like, oh, if I've really got to do the other thing, I don't want to forget about it. And then if it's been on the like to do eventually list for a long time, then I have to like revisit the list because I'm like, well, is this actually that important anyway? So like I ordered that as well. And having that as like almost a ritualized Sunday, and then at the end of every work day to go through and write that list has been really, really helpful. Then the other thing I did, not as much this year because I've had slightly more time than usual. I had slightly more time than usual at the beginning of this year until starting with the other business as well. I used to always keep at least one day of the week completely meeting free. And if that wasn't possible, I'd only do blocks of time. Like, because I find if I have even like one meeting in a day, I'm so lazy. I'll be like, oh, well, I've got that meeting. I couldn't possibly start the project. I couldn't possibly do it. So I have to like be really strict on like, all right, all my meetings are at this slot so that I have the whole afternoon free, or all this day is free. It used to be Tuesdays, just completely free to work on everything. And when I did that, that was really game changing for me because it just, that would be like my most productive day of the week. It would give me a lot more energy. 90% of the time, I end up doing more than I expected to as well. But beyond that, in structuring my weeks, that's probably it. Like my to-do lists and having that backlog so I don't lose things. And anytime I have an idea, I'll write it down. I usually have an app on my phone now just because it's always with me to write it down so it's not lost and I don't have to keep it in my head. And I haven't, sometimes I actually feel a little guilt because I don't have like a really strict structure or anything. I remember once telling a friend, I'm like, I feel like I should have a side hustle because everyone's always talking about side hustles. It's like, are you mad? Like, are you not already starting a business? But, you know, it's that hustle culture, how intense it can get when you're already going out and doing the thing. But yeah, that structure has worked really well for me.
Yeah, I think, and likewise, I completely agree with everything you just said then. And I actually was in a really good habit last year of doing what you just said then, planning out my week on a Sunday. And then Christmas came, New Year came, and, you know, it's amazing how easy it is to fall out of those good habits. And then you get a month into the year and you go, God, I need to start planning out my week again, because the pull that you can get, and then that's when you start to feel overwhelmed, because then you just become a bit of a busy fool and you end up doing things that you think, this isn't actually that important. What am I doing? So it's that there's always things that need to get done in a week. And I always think, okay, between 9 till 3, I want to be working on things that are going to be moving the business forward, revenue generating activities, whether that's business development, whether that's training the team. What are those key performance indicators that I need to get done that's going to move this business forward? And then outside of those hours, it will be content creation, you know, sort of thinking about maybe writing a blog or editing podcasts, whatever that is. But that's more of my creative time. And I found that that has really helped me structure my week in a way that I go, okay, between these hours I'm doing these activities, and between these hours I'm doing these activities. And then, like you said, the importance of rest, of actually having a day off. And I struggled with that. I struggled with that for a long, long time, because again, going back to what you just said, then hustle culture, you've got to always be doing something, and you're lazy, and you go on social media and it's like, if you're not working 14, 16-hour days, you're a loser. And you go, oh my God, I'm a loser. Like, I'm not working hard enough. But, you know, I think that that's only sustainable for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Do I think sometimes it's necessary? Absolutely. I'm not going to sit here and say that I haven't put in 14-hour, 16-hour days before. I absolutely have. But as soon as I could afford to employ people and delegate and offload certain things, and things that I perhaps thought, okay, that's not in my zone of excellence or genius, that can go there, you know, that's when I started freeing up a bit more time. But in the beginning, when you're a solopreneur, yeah, like to get the business off the ground, you might have to put in a bit of extra work. You might be working weekends.
Yeah.
And that's also okay, because what I've also noticed as well is that where the guilt sometimes comes in is you want to work, but you think, oh, I shouldn't be working. And
Yeah.
sometimes if I have a moment where I go, I actually want to work today, and it might be a Sunday, I could have come up with an idea for a blog or it's almost something creative. I'm not going to sit in BD or try and get a hold of a client on a Sunday. I think they tell me where to go. But if it's a creative idea, I sometimes go, I want to do that. But sometimes I go, oh, you shouldn't be doing that because you should be resting. So I think there's the other side of it as well, which is quite interesting. But the final thing that I'd love to sort of go into, Sarah, is like, you know, if you were speaking to younger Sarah and she was just starting out on this entrepreneurial business journey, any advice for her / people who are thinking about, they've got an idea, they want to start, what advice did you have for those people who are in that sort of early stage idea?
I would say to back yourself more than you ever thought possible, in that you're just so much more capable than you realize, and because most people want you to succeed. And I say that because anytime I've had those moments of doubt, or I've kind of limited what I wanted for myself, when I get through whatever the challenge was that I was limiting or whatever I wanted, I'm like, oh, I could have done that. That actually wasn't that bad. I should have aimed higher. I probably could have done it, or I could have spoken to someone who could have helped me get there. And I think especially as women, we're constantly like, if I don't tick every box, I can't do it, or I couldn't possibly, and kind of talking yourself out of it a lot. But that is the number one thing that I would say to myself in the past. And it's the number one thing I would say to anyone who's thinking about starting. I'm like, it's just the potential for it to go far beyond your wildest dreams is absolutely there. And even if it doesn't, the potential for you to learn what is far beyond your wildest dream is inevitable. Like that is 100%. So it's just so worth putting yourself out there, taking those risks and backing yourself as much as possible.
What a wonderful way to finish the episode. I think that's incredibly inspiring and some phenomenal advice. Sarah, where can I send people to find out more about you? Where do you hang out? Where can we send people?
Yeah, please feel free to LinkedIn stalk me. And if there's any way I can help at all, I'm always happy to. So many people have given me their time over the years. I'd be honored to have the opportunity to pay it forward.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been an absolute honor, a pleasure, and very inspiring to speak with you today. So thanks for being on the Sister Club podcast. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoy these episodes, the number one thing you can do to help us grow and keep spreading our mission and message is to hit the subscribe button. And if you have time, give us a quick rating. I appreciate each and every one of you who tune in every week, and we look forward to bringing you many more episodes this year. Take care.